in celebrating this important event. Now, as Professor Pereira indicated, the Institute of Food Science and Technology of Sri Lanka is a recent comer to the family of adhering bodies of IFSTSL. But being recent comer doesn't mean that it hasn't been active and leader in its field, both domestically and internationally. And I guess the organization of an event such as this one to contribute to the celebration of World Food Safety Day and to also participate in propagation of the importance of food safety science as part of the solutions to manage, to mitigate, and more importantly, to prevent food safety issue is, I guess, a testament to that level of leadership. Now, this year's World Food Safety Day has been themed Food Standards Saves Lives. And there is a particular reason associated with that. 2023 happens to be also the year where the world and our community, the food community that is also celebrating another momentous, and another important milestone, and that is the 60th anniversary of the FAO-WHO Codex Alimentarius Commission. In fact, a few days from now, we will be celebrating the 60th anniversary of the first meeting that took place in Rome, where essentially various countries from around the world, as part of the FAO-WHO Food Standards Program, came together and actually initiated the discussions around the development of food standards and of a food code that would be useful globally. Now, of course, in the context of food safety, for standards to save lives, they have to be robust, and to be robust, they have to be anchored in science and in food science. And that is why, in fact, IFSTSL happens to be a strong supporter of activities of the Codex Alimentarius Commission and enjoys the position of observer in Codex, and has enjoyed the position of observer for many years now. By being an observer in Codex, what we attempt to do is to bring the voice of food science and food technology to the discussions that are taking place around the world in relation with the development of food standards, and particularly in relation with the development of food safety standards. Once again, we hope that we will work with you and with other adhering bodies to ensure that the voice of all countries around the world and the food science and technology community around the world is well represented within the forum of the standard setting body of the world that is Codex. And let us use this opportunity today to further highlight the importance of collaboration and partnership in food safety, and again, to working together towards providing the scientific underpinning for the development of standards that will continue to contribute to saving lives. Once again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be with you today. And I would like to wish you a great workshop, and again, acknowledge your leadership in the celebrations of World Food Safety Day 2023. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. So food safety is a critical issue that extends far beyond public health concerns. So to talk to you about the impact of food safety on the economy, health, and well-being, please welcome Professor Conrad Pereira, who is a member of the Food Safety Working Group of IFSTSL. He's also a professor in food science and technology at the University of Auckland, New Zealand, and he has extended his consultation to many international organizations such as the FAO, UNIDO, World Bank, and the Secretariat of Pacific Community on Food Processing Projects. Dear sir, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and this forum is open to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for that introduction. It's my pleasure to talk to you about the impact of food safety on the economy and health and safety. So, according to Food and Agriculture Organization, If food isn't safe, it isn't food. We cannot hope to end hunger and create a zero hunger world without this basic building block. In 2004, 160 countries voted at the United Nations to make food a human right rather than a commodity. Let me get this. Right. It was agreed that everyone on the planet should have access to sufficient food, both quantitatively and qualitatively, in a culturally acceptable way. Unsafe food containing harmful bacteria, viruses, parasites, chemical substances, or physical contaminants cause more than 200 types of diseases, ranging from diarrhea to cancer. An estimated 600 million people, almost 1 in 10 of the population of the world, fall ill as a result of eating contaminated food, and 420,000 die every year. Diarrheal diseases are the most common foodborne causes, and causing 500 million people to fall ill, with 230,000 deaths every year. It is estimated that foodborne diseases result in the loss of 33 million disability-adjusted life years in 2019. The concept of disability-adjusted life years is shown, how it's calculated is shown in this figure. So everyone at birth will have a certain life expectancy. And let's see, that person lives a healthy life up to a certain point, say like point, and then he lives with a disability or illness or injury for a further number of years. And then he dies at this point in time. So this area marked in gray or brown is called the years lived with a disability. And if you subtract the life expectancy from the time of death in number of years, you get the years of life lost. So if you add the two together, you get the disability adjusted life years. So this graph represents the global burden of foodborne diseases in millions of disability adjusted. Huh? Disability adjusted life years. Can you hear me now? Umesh, can you hear me?
Yes, Professor, we can hear you. And again, a small reminder to the other participants, please keep your mics on mute while the session is progressing. Yes, Professor, you can proceed.
So the global burden of foodborne diseases is disproportionately represented by the low and middle income countries. You see in this graph here, this is from all hazards, the first bar diagram. And then you have diarrheal disease agents, invasive infectious disease agents, helminths, and chemicals and toxins. Over time, food tainted by pesticides or containing subtherapeutic doses of antibiotics that accumulate in the human body can lead to chronic diseases. An estimated 70% of the global case of foodborne diseases are concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. 40% of the burden falls on children under 5 years of age, resulting in 120,000 deaths per year. Biological hazards from viruses, bacteria, fungi, parasites cause 97% of the total burden in low and middle income countries. Fruit and vegetables and animal-based foods are among the most nutrient-rich, but mounting evidence suggests they are also often the most contaminated foods, especially when sourced in informal markets. I'm sure you have seen instances like this, very unhygienic market vending areas, unhygienic food preparation practices, and so on. WHO reported that the global burden of foodborne diseases is comparable to those of 3 major infectious diseases: HIV/AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. Despite this, the financial investment in food safety remains comparatively low. Given the emergence of both unsustainable and unhealthy diets, agencies like the USDA offer nutritional guidelines to balance diets. However, if one were to follow the USDA dietary guidelines for all food groups, example, oils, grains, meat and pulses, fruit and vegetables, and dairy, an enormous amount of additional fertile land would be needed in order to produce enough food to feed the world. Food safety, nutrition, food security, and sustainability are closely linked. Unsafe food makes the vicious cycle of disease and malnutrition worse, particularly affecting infants, young children, the elderly, the immune-compromised, and the sick. Foodborne diseases obstruct socioeconomic development by straining healthcare systems and harming national economies, tourism, and trade. Rising incomes in emerging economies increase the demand for fresh foods, and urbanization increases the volume of food being transported between food producers and consumers. Thus, the burden of foodborne diseases is expected to increase in emerging economies. Therefore, it is likely that nutritional status of the population will decline. This trend is counter to that of infectious diseases, which generally decline as nations develop. Growing urbanization, changing purchasing power, and new systems of marketing change food access and consumption patterns. Consumers need to be better informed and empowered with the tools to make nutritious and safe food choices, even if it means returning to the more traditional way of eating seasonally produced food. From a cultural point of view, improving management and hygiene practices in the food and agricultural sectors can help to reduce the outbreak and spread of foodborne diseases. Reducing the use of antibiotics in livestock and seafood could also decrease the risk of antimicrobial resistance along the food chain and in the environment. This is a major problem that is anticipated in the future, antimicrobial resistance. Foodborne illnesses are usually infectious or toxic in nature and caused by fungi, bacteria, viruses, parasites, or chemical substances entering the body through contaminated water or food. Food pathogens can cause severe diarrhea or debilitating infections, including meningitis. Meningococcal bacteria is one of the causes of infection of meningitis, especially among infants, young children, and young adults. It's very, very common in developing countries, but it's also found in developed countries to some extent. Chemical contamination can lead to acute poisoning or long-term diseases such as cancer. Foodborne diseases may lead to long-lasting disability and death. Recent reports of widespread detection of microplastics in water, food, and human feces have raised the specter of another contaminant of significant concern. So let's look at some of the major foodborne illnesses and their causes. Salmonella, Campylobacter, E. coli are among the most common foodborne pathogens, with sometimes fatal outcomes. They can come from eggs, poultry, and other products of animal origin and fresh produce. Listeria can lead to miscarriage in pregnant women and death among young and elderly. They can come from unpasteurized dairy products and ready-to-eat food. Vibrio cholera can lead to abdominal pain, vomiting, and diarrhea that can lead to dehydration and death. They can come from cooked rice, vegetables, millet gruel, various types of seafood, and so on. Antimicrobials. Low doses of antibiotics can affect normal human gut flora and lead to chronic diseases and the emergence of resistant strains of pathogens. Due to overuse and misuse in veterinary and human medicines. Viruses can lead to nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Hepatitis A can cause long-lasting liver disease. They can come from raw or uncooked seafood or contaminated raw produce. Parasites can lead to mild discomfort, but in severe cases, death. They can come from food or direct contact with animals. Parasites enter the food chain via water or soil. Prions, specific forms of neurodegenerative diseases such as BSE, bovine spongiform encephalopathy. They come from infectious agents composed of very small molecular weight proteins in diseased cattle. Chemicals can affect immune system, normal development in children, or cause cancer. They can come from many sources, including pesticides, Teflon, perfluorooctanoic acid, hexafluoride. These two compounds, perfluorooctanoic acid and hexafluoride, are the components that are used in Teflon coatings to have non-stick properties in pots and pans. Natural toxins can result in various symptoms, various types of toxicity, like genotoxic, carcinogenic, paralytic, diuretic, endocrine disrupting, etc. They are naturally produced. Sources include mycotoxins produced by fungi, mycotoxins, marine toxins found in shellfish, phytotoxins produced by plants. In some parts of the world, you get what you call the red tide in the ocean, especially it happens in our part of the world during summertime when the temperature is warm and there's a lot of nutrient gathered in the ocean and near the sea coast. You can get proliferation of phytoplanktons. They are dinoflagellates, very tiny, microscopic organisms. They produce deadly toxins. There's no antidote for these toxins. So during that time, during red tide, it's dangerous to take shellfish. So the Department of Primary Industries usually advise people, or they tell people not to take shellfish from those areas affected. Heavy metals such as lead, calcium, mercury, and arsenic can cause neurological and kidney damage, can come from pollution of air, water, and soil. Contaminants and endocrine disruptors, chemicals that pose risks during prenatal and early postnatal development. They can come from a wide range of substances, both natural and man-made, such as pesticides. Unsafe foods result in the loss of consumers, businesses, and societies. Consumers who become ill bear the medical costs, lost days of work and productivity, physical suffering, and even mortality. Foodborne illnesses tend to be a greater burden on poor people and on women, children, and the elderly. Recently, the World Bank estimated that foodborne illnesses cost low to middle income countries at least $100 billion annually in lost productivity and medical costs. The USDA estimates that foodborne illnesses cost the US at least $15 billion annually in similar losses. However, these figures do not consider specific losses to firms or industries from costs associated with limiting risk, or lost market opportunities. Food companies bear the cost of food safety in many ways. They may adopt measures to improve food safety or avoid hazards, and these can impose direct costs. Modern food safety management includes the cost of monitoring and training to ensure compliance with good practices. When food safety failures happen, such as product recalls, they impose direct losses on firms, as well as potential liability costs from impacted customers. Food safety failures may reduce equity value of firms and may lead to bankruptcy. An entire industry can suffer loss of markets when food safety failures occur, so that even companies and brands with good food safety practices are penalized through the loss of reputation by association. Many food safety controls and procedures have fixed upfront costs. These costs tend to fall more heavily on small firms and enterprises as they experience higher cost of compliance per unit of product produced. In some cases, the cost of modernization and enforcement of international food safety standards can be as high as 75% for small and medium-sized food processing enterprises. In recent decades, trade in high-value food products had expanded, with many low to middle income countries exporting fresh and perishable products to high-income countries. These exports have been disrupted due to lack of compliance with food safety requirements imposed by the importing country or by multinational firms. Concerns have been raised about the impact on trade and development, even though disruptions have been small relative to the total volume of trade. Similar issues are now apparent in the rapidly developing markets of middle-income countries, where urban consumers concerned about potential hazards in locally sourced products prefer to buy imported food through expanding e-commerce channels. This may skew development of markets towards food imports and put domestic producers at a disadvantage. It's postulated by 2050, 2 out of 3 people will live in megacities, cities of more than 10 million residents. So adequate investment is needed to address challenges with food distribution, sanitation and hygiene, food waste, and water scarcity. Water is going to be a very scarce commodity in time to come. Ensuring food safety is a shared responsibility along the value chain. Improvements will require public-private partnerships, education and investment in all stages of food production, as well as actionable information for consumers about how to avoid risks. Investment in consumer food safety education and communication has the potential to reduce foodborne diseases and return significant savings to companies. Food safety is a critical enabler for market access and productivity, which drives economic development and poverty alleviation, especially in rural areas. It will be a key driver in the development of food markets, growth of farm income, small company revenue, and health of growing urban populations. Perhaps our biggest responsibility is related to the environmental and social impacts caused by the food systems that we favor. The current generation is the first to truly recognize these issues and know that the global food production system is one of the biggest contributors of greenhouse gas emissions. This generation must consider alternative energy and food sources to limit the depletion of natural resources, land erosion, deforestation, and massive pollution of the land and the ocean. It is now also clear that food systems have a degree of responsibility for an explosion of non-communicable diseases, including obesity, diabetes, and several forms of cancer. Fortunately, solutions are at hand. Technology can play an important part in addressing some of these challenges. We now have new ways of producing proteins. You may have heard about lab meat or cellular agriculture, insects, seafood. These can help improve not only traceability, but also sustainability. Aquaculture is the fastest growing animal food producing sector in the world. Urban farming and 3D printing of food help in the production of local traceable foods. This diagram illustrates the pyramid of food safety schemes and standards. So right at the base, you have the Codex Alimentarius as the base of all the food regulations in the world. And then above that, you have the national and regional regulations. Some regulations may be more stringent at the national level and the regional level compared to the Codex Alimentarius for certain products. And then above that, you have the ISO standards, which are much more stringent. And then you have the private schemes, such as Global Food Safety Initiative standards. So you can see that as we increase the food standards, the regulatory standards, the safety of food become more and more prominent. So in conclusion, we can say food safety is paramount to alleviate hunger, promote health and well-being. It is very important for national and international trade. Food safety goes hand in hand with nutrition, food security, and sustainability. Unsafe food makes the vicious cycle of disease and malnutrition worse. The current food systems have a degree of responsibility for an explosion of non-communicable diseases, including obesity, diabetes, and several forms of cancer. Ensuring food safety is a shared responsibility. Public-private partnerships, education, and investment in all stages of food production and processing are required to produce safe food. Food safety standards and schemes ensure that the food one produces is safe, for consumption, trade, and export. Thank you very much for your kind attention. That's my talk.
Thank you very much, Professor Pereira, for being here with us today, and also for that very informative presentation on how diverse the impact of food safety is. Food safety standards are not meant to be just words on paper, but guidelines that should be followed by the industry as well as the public. So today we have another very special guest, Emeritus Professor Upali Samarajiva, who has worked with many international organizations, including the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, the World Bank, FAO, United Nations Development Program, and the Asian Development Bank in 20 countries in Asia, Africa, and the South American region to develop their food testing laboratories to international standards as a food safety expert with countless years of experience. Dear sir, I would like to invite you to share your thoughts with us on the gaps between the food standards and the practices by public.
Thank you, Mr. Umesh. Can I get the screen sharing, please? Professor Conrad may have to discontinue sharing the screen so that we could use the facility. Are you getting the screen, Mr. Umesh?
No,
Are
sir,
you getting the screen?
not yet, sir.
Oh, I had to go back and come, I think.
Okay. All right.
Give me a second. Did you get it?
Yes,
Yes,
sir. Visible now. Please proceed.
Okay, right. Okay, let me start. Thank you, Madam President of the Institute of Food Science and Technology, Sri Lanka. The distinguished speakers, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first thank the IFSTSL for inviting me to make a presentation on this important occasion, where I am hoping to look at the gaps between the food standards and what is practiced by public. After all, if we want to save the lives through the food standards, the first thing is we have to start practicing them at the public level. Otherwise, we are not going to achieve what we want. Okay. Now, the food standards could be either specifications, because food standards is a very broad word. So I'm going to define a few things before I start discussing it. The specifications and the food regulations. The specifications would mean the things used up by the food producers, the guidelines, rules, codes, all that, to maintain the uniformity and quality of foods. I'm sure there's a speaker on this subject later who will expand on what I said. Then we have the food regulations, which is used by the regulatory system legally, mainly to ensure safety of foods. Of course, there's a certain degree of overlap between these two areas. Having said that, there's a role of the public, there's the public demand, there's a consumer concerns, and there's a role for the authorities to save the lives of the people. So it's a combined effort by everybody, and it is not just the regulations, not just having the regulations, but people learning about it and practicing it. So the question that comes out is, how much are we concerned on saving our lives through the application, use, and understanding of the regulations? Now let us look at the start from home. The general perception at home is we wash our hands very well. We use soap and water to wash our hands before the meals. We do it the way we are advised to. Apply the soap, rub it for 20 seconds in between the fingers and wash them away so that all the bacteria and the dirt will be gone. But these three petri dishes shows what I have observed in my hand. The top one shows when I just go and put my fingers on the agar plate, how the bacteria started growing. The one to the left, where there is no growth, shows you after I wash my hand, when I put my fingers on the agar plate, that there is no bacteria in my fingers. The third one to the right tells you when I just touch my neck, simply touch the neck for half a fraction of a second and put my fingers on the petri dish, what do you get? The bacteria. So this tells us the importance of washing our hands well and see that nothing gets across from your hand into the food. Then also we are very happy that we use the refrigerator to keep the food. With those two, we believe that we are okay. Well, from the consumer point of view, they might feel they are okay, but if you go deep into the science of it, you realize ensuring our food safety goes much beyond washing the hands and using the refrigerator at home. So we need to be more mindful about what we could do and how do we do things. So let me take a few examples, about 6 examples, one by one, and see how we can ensure food safety at the home level. There are questions which we need to think of answering. Did I read the label before I purchase the food? And before cooking the food? How many of us do it? Are the constituents mentioned in the label in line with health needs, the dietary restrictions, or the family members? Now here you see the label. In that, at the bottom, you can see the ingredients. It tells what is there and what may be dangerous. And also right at the bottom, it says allergy information, where they indicate that there are certain allergic compounds may be in it. So some of us may be allergic to those compounds. So did we read our label before we buy the food? Because unless we do that, nobody can help us. The regulations cannot help us. The health authorities cannot help us. Then the next stage is, did I follow the instructions for cold storage of the food and the procedure to bring the food to the room temperature before cooking? Now the next label shows the conditions given for storage. Also it tells how to defrost thoroughly in a refrigerator and not by holding it to water in a tap. So it tells us certain things to be practiced at home to ensure that there are no food safety threats created by ourselves in our own food. So these are the responsibilities of the consumers and not that of the regulatory authorities. So we may talk about the best regulations on food safety, but unless we start practicing them, we are not going to get anywhere. Then let us take a few cases of different foods as groups. The first group I want to take is the food safety in fruits and vegetable handling. Now, if you look at the literature, it is seen that about 15% of the food recalls are associated with fruits and vegetables in the foreign countries. That's a large number. We think they are very clean. Look at this picture. See the way we are handling our bananas. Dump one on one top of the other. I can show you many pictures of this from Sri Lanka, which allows various types of contaminants to get into it. And we are not mindful about it. Then if you go and see at any market, any wholesale market, at the end of the day, there will be several tractor loads of spoiled fruits and vegetables disposed from that place. So all that tells us things are not rosy, but there are things that could be done by everybody to ensure the safety of the food. Now, if you take the things that we should do during cultivation, we need to use adequately clean irrigation water, use animal dung only after composting, not the raw dung, apply only recommended pesticide doses at the time for the pests, and prevent the damage to the plots by the animals. So everybody complains these days, monkeys are coming, peacocks are coming, so on and so on. So we need to think about all these aspects. They are adding problems into the food chain, and the sufferers are we. Now, this picture in the right-hand bottom shows you how a clean transport of vegetables is done in Bandaravela by a cooperative society, so that there is no chance for the things to get contaminated. So the use of clean crates to collect harvest directly in the field is an important aspect. I remind you about the tea, because 200 years back or even more, the British introduced the basket, cane basket, to put the leaves after plucking. Then the leaves are taken to a location. They don't put it on the cement floor. They put it on a polythene bag, polythene sheet, and then they start sorting them out. Are we doing the same with karapincha? Are we doing the same with our green vegetables? So the problem is in our hand, and it is our ignorance that leads to problems of contamination. Then we are supposed to wash the harvest in clean running water. You may have seen this picture many times when you are going to Nuwara. The vegetables looks nice, the water looks even nicer, but is it pure water? Is it not contaminated? Is it not coming from a land up where all the fecal matter is disposed improperly? So this is where we allow the things to go wrong. And then we expect the regulatory systems, the governments, standards, laws to come in. So there's a role for us to play. And in this case, fruits and vegetables, there's a big responsibility of the farmer, and the responsibility is in the hand of the agricultural field officers to ensure the proper practices are maintained. So the responsibilities are clear, and we need to ensure it if we want to get quality and disease-free foods. Take the case of milk handling. There are clear guidelines on disposal of milk from infected animals. There's no question about it, and a lot of people will follow, I'm sure. Then we are expected to cool the milk to temperatures below 6 degrees Celsius immediately in the farm and store at 5 degrees Celsius for transport. Look at this picture. Do you think that this milk will not get exposed to all kinds of things in the atmosphere and all kinds of contaminations that can happen during the collection of milk? And then look at this. All this milk is put into cans. Nobody knows whether they are clean or not. And they are transported in lorries to the place where they are delivering it. It's not cold. It's not cooled. It's exposed to the sun. It is not even covered with a gunny bag to protect against the sunlight and the heating. So with that kind of approach, it is very, very difficult to ensure safety of milk. Then also, when we are feeding the animals, it's essential that we give them mold-free dairy feeds, clean drinking water, follow the animal husbandry practices with the assistance of the veterinarians, and minimize the bacterial contamination of milk by washing the cans and other utensils with soap and water, drying the cans before filling the milk. These are major problem I see in Sri Lanka. Can you see these people are washing the cans using some water? I don't know where it is, whether it's a river or just a waterwala, and the cans are washed like that. And this water may be containing all kinds of microorganisms, pesticides, and so on. I have seen myself going beyond Nuerelia, a truck stopped by the side of the road and washing all these cans from the water in a paddy field. So you can imagine how much of microorganisms are put into this before you put the milk. Now, to overcome this situation, one of the good milk industries in Sri Lanka, many years back, had their own cans. So when the farmer supplies the milk in the can, they retain the can and give them a cleaned can. So the factory undertook to clean the can and give a clean can to the farmer. And they realized after several weeks, the quality of milk improved, the quality of their products improved, and many problems they were able to overcome. So the solution to the food safety problem lies not only on the regulations, but on the practice of the people. Now again, we can see there's a regulation in Sri Lanka about hydrogen peroxide used in the milk. This regulation was there maybe 50 years perhaps. I know in 1980s, when I was the public analyst in Kandy, I tested the imported milk powder and local milk powder for their peroxide values. And I found that the local milk powder had very high peroxide values. So I brought this to the notice of the Food Advisory Council kindly, but they didn't do anything because they had different views, because they were looking at it from a chemical angle and they think, I see, hydrogen peroxide is very sensitive. With sunlight, it goes away. What's the problem with milk? They don't realize that the milk binds hydrogen peroxide and it is retained. And then when you drink it, during digestion, they are released back. So this went on for a long time. At one point, one of the companies, Indian companies who took over Sri Lankan milk system, they had a very educated man. He went to the Food Advisory Council and said, if I do it in India, I will not be sitting here, I will be behind the bars. Then the Food Advisory Committee got excited and they brought in regulations to stop it. But today I see in 1994, this regulation has been introduced again. Of course, it has a lot of terms done by so-and-so under so-and-so's guidance under these conditions, and or at the end, it should be informed to the Food Advisory Council or the Director General of Health Services within 24 hours. So if that is happening, between 1994 and today, there may have been hundreds of cases of complaints coming or information coming to the Director General of Health Services indicating that we used it because we had no other solution. So we need to think seriously, are these regulations going to work in situations like this? So therefore, we have to think about the standards, the practice, and what the people do in a much more sensible way than what we are doing today. Then let's take another case, the safety of fish as a food. As was said by Professor Conrad, the contamination, the oceans are getting contaminated with heavy metals, mercury, cadmium, arsenic, and so on. There are biotoxins produced by the marine algae. Other pathogenic bacteria entering from rivers and lagoons into the coastal areas, polluting the areas with all kinds of microorganisms. Don't believe that all the microorganisms die as soon as they get into the salt water. No, they can resist and they can adapt and they live in salt water, especially near the coastal areas. So then we have the histamine producing bacteria. Although the bacteria is active at post-harvest, the bacteria is hanging on to the fish at pre-harvest, but it does not become active because of the protective systems in the fish. So in a situation like this, I will be talking a little more about the biotoxins in the next slide. In a situation like this, we don't have much checks and controls on the safety. The only requirement is store at 0 degrees Celsius immediately after harvest till they are cooked. Now, if you look at the two pictures on the right-hand side, you can clearly see the top one, there is ice and there's protection. The bottom one, the fish looks quite nice. It's appealing. Anybody will want to go and buy the fish. But there is no guarantee histamine production has stopped. So we need to apply these regulations and conditions if we want to see that the fish is safe. I said I'm going to talk a little more about the algal blooms around Sri Lanka. Now this map tells us, sorry, there's a lot of contamination by red dots around India and also between Sri Lanka and India in the Gulf of Mannar. Look at this picture. It looks like a tea farm in Nuwara, is it? It is Gulf of Mannar with all this algae. Then there's also a picture which tells about deadly blooms in Gulf of Mannar, picture taken by NASA. You can see India in your left-hand side and the Pork Strait, and you can see the bluish patches indicating the fluorescence by the blue-green algae. Go down the southern coast, you see the same picture here and there. So we have the problem of algal blooms. Some of them may be toxic, not all. And also I saw a report, a statement by NARA, which is very encouraging, that there are diatomic blooms in Dehiwala, Kalutara, Payagala, Chilau, and NARA says that they are not toxic diatoms. So that's a good sign. But at the same time, remember, in the world, the growth of biotoxin, the biotoxin producing algae is spreading. They are carried by the ships. They were carried from USA to New Zealand, and we know how it's spread around New Zealand in the coast. So it is happening everywhere, and it's happening around our coast also. So the safety of fish, we need to think twice. Then we get back to another issue, the lunch packets. Everybody, most of the people, I would say, take a packet of food from home to be taken as lunch. What is essential is they have to keep this cooked food cool at 5 degrees Celsius, because once they get to the office, it may be sitting somewhere for 4 or 5 hours, giving enough time for the microorganisms to divide and multiply and become larger populations. And then the next step is to heat it at 70 degrees Celsius for 2 minutes prior to consumption. Now you might ask me, where the hell can you do that in Sri Lanka? Let's wait for a while. Let's see whether I can do it. Next step, if we don't take food from home, we purchase around the workplace. Then there should be some guideline to buy only from meal producers is registered by the Food Control Administration of the Ministry of Health and having food safety certification. Otherwise, if you start buying from anybody on the road, maybe there are people coming in bicycles with lunch parcels, then you are inviting trouble. So therefore, food safety is not something to be brought about by the state, by the regulatory system, by the standard, but by the people also. Now, the low temperature storage and heating facilities in a workplace and running water to wash the hands and fruits show a commitment of the employers to maintain good health of the employees. If you maintain the good health of the employees, there will be less people falling sick, there will be less people taking leave, the productivity will increase. So the responsibility lies around us, but we need to motivate the proper people in the proper way rather than trying to push the regulations here and there. Then let us look at another very important group, food sellers. They are doing a social service while earning their money. And most of these people are in their village markets, which we could use, which the health authorities could use to give a good advice to the public. Now look at this picture. It's well protected. Gloves are used. Things are maintained in a very hygienic way. It is a social responsibility to sell only safe food by the sellers. Now, we cannot leave it in the hands of the sellers totally, but we have to provide them with certain facilities. These food markets are supervised by the provincial or local health authorities. They can demonstrate, the markets can demonstrate proper food safety practices to the public. We go to a village market, if you find all the food is put on the ground, on muddy floor and selling to the people, we are not giving any good advice to the people. But if you see, there are tables on which the food is available for sale, maybe vegetables, maybe fruits, and that those tables could be washed with running water and they meet the hygienic standards. So the responsibility lies in the local authorities as well as the inspectors who is supposed to supervise them. Again, in those places, the fish and meat kiosks are located away from the selling fruits and vegetables and grains. But the whole idea is to prevent contamination. So now if you are showing it to the people, you can then advise the people not to put your fish and the vegetables into the same bag and take without having proper wrappers. So that kind of education could come by practice, and the village markets, therefore, I see as a very good opportunity for us to pass down the food safety messages to the public. If you look at what's happening in the industry, they are doing quite a lot for whatever reason. The employees are required to wash their hands, have the proper attire, cover the head. Then you get an air curtain to prevent the insects going on, as you see in this picture, in a factory. The machinery are cleaned using high pressure hose. After cleaning, the machinery are examined using a torch you could see down there to see that the cleaning has been done properly. If you are drying fish, we dry it not on the floor anymore, at least on a raised platform, so that there is less chance of contamination. Look at this, the way they are transporting, the very cheap way of doing it, but it meets the requirement. This is in Laos. Then handling the fish, people are using all the regulatory requirements, the hygienic conditions. Even in Sri Lanka, you could see where the companies buy onions, they clean the onions, they throw away the dirty ones, and they put them into crates. You could see it in Tamu Tegama. Also, in one of our big factories, there's a lot of attention to the hygienic aspects of food which is touched during packaging. So the industry is practicing the things. There may be gaps, there may be difficulties, there may be mistakes. What about us? Look at this. Now the green patches and the white patches which I have pointed with the yellow arrows shows you the molds growing on chilies. You might say, well, we can't see that. The first time I saw it was I used my spectacles and the pair of spectacles of my wife put together, and I could see the green patches in it. So if you can get rid of those fungus which produces aflatoxin, then you are looking after your own health. Look at this, dried by us in the sun, and mold is growing in it. So that is our problem. That is the problem of the consumer and not the problem of the legal officer. Look at the knife. See the brown dirt in the areas. Look at this blender. See the brown patches between the blades. This is barbecuing. No concern about whether the heat is touching whether the flame is touching the fish, whether the flame is creating polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and so on. So where we can take care, we are not taking care. And then this is the famous Kirihattiya. You could see when you use the Kirihattiya to make curd, the pot is new. We boil the curd and put into it. But later, after using, we are going to reuse this pot for various other things, maybe for storage. But look at the amount of cavities sorry, in the wall of the pot that allows room for any microorganisms or even insects to survive and spoil the food that is kept for storage or whatever reason in the food. So we need to think about this aspect. Somebody has to tell these things, and people have to be concerned about food safety at their level rather than depending totally on the standards. So if you think of home as the unit of food safety, we see, or at least partially, the industry is practicing it. Domestic food handling is a family responsibility. Look at this refrigerator. It's not a refrigerator, I think. It's some storage box. So with all this dirt improperly arranged, with no air, room for the cold air to move around, we may have a very expensive refrigerator at home, but packed with boxes. We are not going to get what is expected from that refrigerator to ensure food safety at home. So it's our responsibility to prevent cross-contamination and keep the uncooked and cooked food separate, which is not happening. Wash all the utensils, including cutting boards, knives, everything with soap and water, just like we wash our hands. Cook the food to 70 degrees Celsius. And we need to understand that there are dangerous temperature zones, which is called the danger zone, between 5 to 60 degrees Celsius. So we need to keep our food away from this temperature range. That is why I suggested that the people should have storage facilities in their workplaces to keep their lunch packet stored at 5 degrees and then reheat it before consumption. So that kind of things we have to start practicing ourselves before we think about anything else. So we, the Institute as an organization, have been doing a lot of work for the benefit of the public. Now, last year, we had an issue of the Vidurava magazine with all these articles addressing different aspects of the food safety problems. That magazine could be downloaded free of charge from the internet, and it is available. This year, we have written several articles to the newspapers. A couple of them have appeared. They were to appear this morning, but I didn't have time to go through it. So some of those write-ups explain certain things beyond what I have said today. So we are trying our best. I think it's as said by everybody, it is an effort of everybody getting together to ensure safety of our own food. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor, for that very insightful presentation. And I'm sure all of us have a lot to take from the experience that you have just shared with us. So thanks again, Professor. And so the theme for this year's Food Safety Day is Food Standards Saves Lives. So how does standardization impact for health and security through food safety? To tell you just that, I would now like to invite Mr. K.A. Anil, who is the Acting Director of the Scientific Standards Division of the Sri Lanka Standards Institute. Mr. Anil.
My name is Anil from Sri Lanka Standard Institution. First of all, I shall be thankful for Institute of Food Science and Technology for providing this opportunity to SLSI just to brief about the standards, food safety standards. Can you hear?
Yes, Mr. Anil, we can hear you.
Yes. Sri Lanka Standard Institution is the national standards organization formulating the national standards. Usually, each country has its own one national standard body for formulation of the national standards, except for certain cases like USA. USA has many standard organization. However, normal situation, one country has one standard organization. SLSI has several departments, several divisions, except standard formulation. Standardization is the formulation, publishing, and implementation of the standards. SLSI has several departments for implementation of the standards. Laboratory services for testing samples, then product certification scheme, the SLS mark scheme maintained by the product certification department, and the national quality awards, system certification, and import inspection activities. Those are the activities conducted by SLSI. Usually, the national standards are voluntary documents. Basically, it is voluntary document. However, later, those standards can be imposed by any acts or regulations. That import inspection is a kind of imposement of the standard under the Import and Export Control Act. There are certain food and other items are identified for import inspection scheme. 130 items are covered under the import inspection scheme. It covers electrical item, RCCBs, MCBs, fans, electrical bulbs, and certain food items, canned fish, oil, edible oil, lentils. When any importer importing these products to Sri Lanka, the product shall be confirmed into the relevant standard specification under Import Inspection, Import and Export Act. That's a one way of implementation of standard. Then the product certification, when we get the product certification is also usually a voluntary scheme. If any manufacturer or a producer willing to obtain SLS mark, they can apply and obtain the SLS mark. However, under the Consumer Protection Act, certain items, the SLS mark is compulsory or mandatory for the certain identified item made in Sri Lanka, especially building material and certain food items.
Mr. Anil,
Yes.
would you be able to put the presentation into presentation mode so that the viewers can see it clearly?
Sorry?
Would you be able to set the presentation into presentation mode?
Yes.
Would you be able to enlarge the slides?
Now it's okay?
Mr. Anil,
Yes.
yeah, if you click that presentation mode symbol, it's easy. From down, there is a symbol for that.
So I
On
think
the lower bar, there's a symbol of the screen. Move to the right. No, further to the right. Further, that's right. Click there.
Now, okay.
much better. Mr. Anil, you can proceed now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Just apology for the inconvenience. When we get the standard formulation, there are two divisions. One is engineering, another one is scientific standards. We just talk about scientific standard. Scientific standard division has 4 sections: food, agriculture, then textile, garment and leather. Next one, chemical, polymer, paper, board, packaging and cosmetics. All are quite related to food safety and health of the people. When we get a history of the standardization, there were standardization activities. Standardization activities are implemented even during the prehistoric period, but the systematic standardization is started during the Industrial Revolution, 1980s, especially the written document. The first standard as the written document was published during 1942 by Joseph Whitworth for the threads of the nut and bolts. With the Industrial Revolution, one of the most important machine is nut and bolt. Without nut and bolt, we can't run any machine. Therefore, it was a requirement that nut and bolts to be compatible. Then he prepared the Joseph Whitworth standard for the nut and bolts during 1842, and still certain engineers and certain companies, institutions are using these Whitworth standardization. Then the standardization, scientific systematic standardization process was performed. These standards provide the give advantages, the fitness for the purpose, usability, compatibility, and interchangeability, and it reduces the varieties and it improves the communication. The aims and the benefits of the standardization again: safety, mitigate the risk, protection of the environment, product protection, consumer protection, and economic benefits. What is a standard? Standard, just a definition, basic definition of the standard. Standard is a document established by consensus. Consensus means when we prepare a standard, standard is not prepared by SLSI ourselves. When we receive a request for preparation of the standard, first we establish a working group, working committee, for the technical committee for preparation of the standard, and we collect some information, literature. Based on these literature, the working group committee can prepare. Working group committee prepares the basic draft of the standard. After that, the basic draft is finalized. It is circulated for the public comments for 2 months period. Then, after receiving the public comments, if there are any significant comments to be considered, working committee again can meet and consider these comments and improve accordingly. After that, there are 4 sectoral committees in scientific standard division: food, agriculture, textile, chemical, and cosmetics. Then the sectoral committee discuss the standard and do the required changes when necessary. Then the SLSI Council approves the standard as a Sri Lanka standard. That is the way we get consensus. The working committee and the sectoral committee represent several stakeholders, related stakeholders, government officers, academics, regulators, consumers, manufacturers, importers, exporters, number of. Above that, working committees and sectoral committees, during the 6-month public comments period, normally we receive number of public comments, and we consider these comments as positive. That is established by the consensus and approved by the recognized body in Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka Standard Institution, Council of the Sri Lanka Standard Institution, that provides common or repeated use rules, guidelines, or the characteristics for activities or their results aimed at the achievement of the optimum degree of order in given context. That is the basic definition for the standards. Then there are type of standard usually. First one, the specification. Specification with respect to food and agricultural products, the specifications prescribe the biological, chemical, and physical characteristics as requirements in these standards. For example, SLS 729 ready-to-serve fruit drinks. The requirements of the ready-to-serve fruit drinks are specified in this standard. There are a number of product specifications. SLS 633 Sri Lanka standard specification for milled rice. SLS 894 Sri Lanka standard specification for bottled drinking water. There are a number of product specification. Except the product specification, then code of practices, guideline to carry out an activity. For instance, we have one SLS 143. SLS 143 is the code of practice for general food hygiene. It provides the guidelines how to maintain the proper hygienic activities and housekeeping of food processing establishment. Then there are glossary of terms, test methods. We usually refer test methods because we are not able to develop our own test methods. We usually get information, or we refer ISO standards for the test methods mainly. Then apart from ISO standards, we use ASTM, AOAC, and other internationally accepted test methods. Sometimes we do some validation of these tests using proficiency testing, etc. Then there are standards for the symbol. There are management system standards. Number of management systems. Usually, the national standards are formulated by the standard body. When we receive a request, we search, we review whether there's an ISO standard relevant to this particular product. When there's an ISO standard and it is appropriate for our local condition, we just adopt this standard. We need not worry about formulating a new standard. We just adopt the product standard, test methods, code of practices, every standards. But when there's no appropriate standard formulated by ISO, we do prepare our own standards for specification, guideline, code of practices. However, for the management system, we don't. The national standards bodies don't prepare the management system standard. What we do, we just adopt ISO standards as our national standard. Out of these ISO standard, it is quite important standard series is ISO 22000 series related to the food safety. I will discuss ISO standards about food safety after this slide. This slide just provides some examples for the product specification related to food safety. SLS 633 is the second the standard for milled rice. It has been published 1987, and very recently it has been revised with the inclusion of the food safety issues. The previous versions did not contain the food safety requirements of the standard, such as potentially toxic elements as lead, cadmium, chromium, mercury, and arsenic. Those requirements are included for the new revision. And aflatoxin and ochratoxin. Aflatoxin and ochratoxin, maximum residue level of aflatoxin and ochratoxins have been introduced to these standards. Then the mole count, the pesticide residue levels are introduced or included to this standard. The level of aflatoxin we have introduced to these standards based on European Union requirements. European Union requirements is 2,4 for aflatoxin and 3,4 ochratoxin. We have collected few samples, tested at University of Peradeniya, Faculty of Veterinary Science. It revealed that the samples available in the local market is able to achieve that level. However, we collected few samples of out of shelf life. All these samples are just beyond the limits. Then the working committee decided to include this 2, 4, and 3 values for aflatoxin and ochratoxin to the standard. Then SLS 896 is split lentils. It has also been revised very recently with inclusion of the food safety parameters, pesticide residues, potentially toxic elements, microbiological requirements, and aflatoxin. Ochratoxin has not been included to this product. When we consider the pesticide residues, we don't need worry about this establishment of the limits for the pesticide residues. We just refer the Codex standard. Codex standard 193 for the residues in food is just referred by our all standards. Then there are a number of standards. Code of practice for application of pesticide has been prepared a couple of years ago. Code of practice for packaging of agro-pesticide for retail market is published. Pesticide residues in food, that is just Codex 193. Then SLS 1610 knapsack, combusting engine drive mist blowers, knapsack sprayers, organic agriculture products and processing is a quite important standard. SLS 1324 is the Sri Lanka standard for requirements for organic agriculture production and processing. It was a requirement because the Sri Lankan organic certification was not accepted by certain European countries, European Union, and certain overseas countries. Then there was a requirement to harmonize the standard. We just study this, we just review those previous standards, and we revised is compatible with the requirements stated in European standard, US Organic Agriculture Program, and other international organic standards. And it helps, this standard, existing of this standard helps much to the exporter of exporting organic products to the European Union. Then, however, most of the farmers are not able to follow and getting certification for the organic agriculture production and processing. However, we need to ensure the safety of the products from the farm. Therefore, we formulated new standards, Sri Lanka standards for good agricultural practices, number of standards for different crops. Then we have prepared a series of standards for compost. There are compost and specifications, Sri Lanka standard specification, 3 specifications for compost. One is compost for municipal solid waste. The second one is compost from agricultural residues. Third one is compost for organic agriculture. When we collect samples during 6 years ago, compost from the municipalities, compost made out of municipal solid waste, number of samples were conforming to the international requirements with respect to potentially toxic elements such as lead, cadmium, mercury, arsenic, and chromium. However, we have collected few samples; those were not conforming to these requirements. When we study what's the reason for that deviation, the sample with high level of these elements collected are made out of the solid waste without sorting. All the samples conforming to the standards, when we visit the places, they have process of sorting before composting. Then we prepare the specification for municipal solid waste compost also. Then there are a number of standards, liquid organic fertilizer. Very recently, we prepared product specification for mushroom, table grapes, fortified rice are not yet published. These standards are not yet published. We are planning to publish very soon. Then code of practice for fortified rice, mushroom production. Fruit ripening is quite important standard. We have received several requests from Consumer Authority, Health Ministry, and different organization, government organization to regulate the process of fruit ripening. There's a requirement for a standard for the process of fruit ripening. Then we recently the biochar already published. Then there are a number of GAP standards, Sri Lanka standard for good agricultural practices for rice, field crops, tea, export agricultural crops. We have prepared several number of good agricultural practices standards. Use and adoption of Codex standard. We adopt the Codex. We can adopt ISO standard directly without doing any change, but the Codex standards and other standards, we collect the information from these standards and adapt as Sri Lanka standard. SLS 143 is the general food hygiene. The basic document of this 143 is CAC RCP1, Codex Alimentarius Commission Recommended Code of Practice number 1, 1969 is the base of this standard. Then there are a number of code of practices we have established in Sri Lanka. SLS 956 is the code of practice for catering establishment. SLS 1065, SLS 1564 is a code of the code of practices for meat and meat production. Then there are a number of maximum residue levels. Usually, maximum residue levels we use Codex 193. Parallel document is SLS 910. Similarly, EU standard also can be adopted as Sri Lanka standard. And especially the food safety management system standard. ISO 22000 food safety management system requirements. Requirements for any organization to obtain ISO 22000 standards. That standard is quite different from other standard. This standard is a requirement. The clauses of this standard say the organizer, the applicant, or the operator shall maintain HACCP plan. Operator shall maintain hazard control plan. Operator shall maintain calibration record. That is a requirement. The requirements are specified in this standard. We have adopted this standard as Sri Lanka standard. The ISO 22000 first standard has been published during 2005, and it has been changed or improved the second revision, first revision is issued 2018. The second revision of the standard is quite different than the first documentation, because the 1918 document, first revision, is risk-based standard. It's always talking about the risk. The food safety hazard, the definition for the food safety hazards given in the previous standard ISO 2005 is biological, chemical, or physical agent in food or condition of food that potential to create harmful effect to the consumer. However, during the first revision in 2018, it has been changed. The condition, the part of condition was removed. The new definition is just biological, chemical, or physical agent in food with potential to create harmful effect to the consumers, because the conditions are not risk. The definition of risk is a result of uncertainty. The conditions are still not risks. The conditions are uncertainty. It might become a risk later. Therefore, it has been removed for the definition of ISO 22000 existing version. ISO 22000 standard is a requirement for organization. Then ISO 22002, there are a number of parts. Because the main part of the food safety management system, ISO 22000 FSSC food safety management system, is prerequisite programs, usually GMPs. That is the basic foundation of food safety management system. The majority of the food safety hazards are controlled by the GMPs, the prerequisite programs. Normally, we use SLS 143 or Codex CAC RCP 1 as a guideline for the prerequisite programs. However, later, ISO, International Standard Organization, has introduced the standard for the prerequisite programs. When you get FSSC certification, it is a must. You shall implement the prerequisite programs according to ISO 22002 Part 1. That is the prerequisite programs on food safety. Part 1 is food manufacturing. And there are several parts. Prerequisite programs on food safety, Part 2 catering, Part 3 farming for primary production, Part 4 food packaging, Part 5 transport and storage, Part 6 is feed and animal food production. There are numbers. Still, we can obtain ISO 22000 certification with implementation of the prerequisite program according to SLS 143 or Codex Alimentarius Commission Recommended Code of Practice number 1. However, we can't get FSSC 22000 without implementation of ISO, prerequisite program according to the 22002 Part 1. Then there are other standard belongs to ISO 22000 family or series. ISO 22003 Part 1 is the requirement for bodies providing audit and certification for food safety management system. That is a standard. The certification body shall comply with the requirements of 22003 Part 1. Then Part 2 is the requirement for bodies providing evaluation and certification of products. That is a requirement for product certification. When we granting SLS mark certification is a product certification. That means SLS logo can be printed on the label. ISO 22000 logo cannot be printed on the label because that certification is granted for the management system of the organization. The product certification is granted for the particular product. when we get a product certification for bottled drinking water, SLS 894 can be printed on the label. This ISO 20003 Part 2 is the requirement for the bodies providing product certification. Then ISO 22004 Food Safety Management System Guideline on the application of ISO 22000. It's a guideline, not the requirement. How to implement the 22,000 activities in an organization, food production organization, catering institution, food processing establishment, any organization to obtain ISO 22000. This standard prescribes the guideline how to implement food safety management activities in an organization. Then there are other standards. ISO 17025 is the general requirement for the competence of testing and calibration of laboratories. When any laboratory, registered laboratory, to get accreditation from Sri Lanka Accreditation Board, recently established, that laboratory shall implement a management system or the testing procedures with compliance with the requirements of 17025 ISO. Our laboratory has obtained accreditation before establishment of Sri Lanka Accreditation Board. We got it from SWIDAC, Swedish Accreditation Council, during 1997. Now, any laboratory or the calibration service in Sri Lanka can obtain their accreditation from Sri Lanka Accreditation Board, SLAB. SLAB is a member board of International Forum for Accreditation. It is accepted worldwide. Then ISO 17021, requirements for bodies providing audit and certification of management system. When the SLSI has a branch or the Department of Management System Certification, the SLSI has a department for management system certification. That management system certification has obtained accreditation with respect to ISO 17021 from 2 accreditation bodies. Very earlier we got accreditation from RVA, Dutch Accreditation Council. Still we are maintaining that accreditation, and we got SLAB accreditation very recently. Now we maintain dual accreditation for ISO 22000 certification, 14,000, 21,000, 9,000, 45,000, all the management systems. Then again, requirements for bodies providing auditing certification management system, same standard. Then ISO 17065 is a conformity assessment for the product certification. There's a product certification department of SLSI. For SLS mark scheme, they have obtained accreditation from SLAB, confirming to 17065, and the same department maintaining organic agriculture certification. Organic agriculture certification is also coming under product certification, not under management system certification, because organic logo can be printed on the label. When we maintaining organic certification scheme, we have to get accreditation under 17065 from SLAB or any international accreditation organization. Then ISO 19011 is the standard for the guideline. It's a guideline for certification activities, especially product certification and management system certification. Thank you very much. That's my brief about food safety and the standardization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing that information with us. So today, as our final guest, we have Mr. S. Nagaya, retired Assistant Director of the Food Control Administration Unit of the Ministry of Health, to enlighten us regarding the publication of food regulations in Sri Lanka. Dear sir, this invitation is for you to start your presentation.
That okay?
I think screen is visible now. Okay. So you can proceed.
Yeah. Thank you very much once again. As I was saying, I was in the regulatory area for a long time as a public health inspector, food and drugs inspector, and the assistant director, who was instrumental in drafting most of these regulations. And I will express my views on some of these things. I'll start with the Food and Drugs Act. The Food and Drugs Act was brought in 1st October 1949, and very few local authorities have adopted those Food and Drugs Act. Only a couple of Colombo and probably Kandy, they have adopted it. It has to be adopted by resolution by the local authorities and published in the government gazette to be operative. So that was an area. You know, the third time we published this act was in the Uva province when I was there, and we had some unique issues with the Food and Drugs Act and the current Food Act and the regulations. As I say, the Food and Drugs Act mainly dealing with the nature, substance, and quality of the food, and few regulations they are published along with the Act as part 2 of the Act. And the Act was needed to be adopted by resolution of the local authorities, as I said earlier. In addition to that, local authorities were empowered to frame and publish bylaws. They call it bylaws and sometimes called regulations, and that has to be approved by the minister. And bearing that in mind, the Local Authorities Standard Bylaws Act of 1952 was published, and under these acts, several activities related bylaws were framed and published, and these again will have to be adopted by the local authorities for implementations. So some of them were related to foods. The local authorities were required to adopt any of them. Then the Food Act came next in 1980 and came into operation, replacing the Food and Drugs Act of 1952. The first formally published food regulation was the Food Standard Regulations 1989. There is a hilarious story behind this, because this was the time I came to the ministry as a food and drugs inspector, and as a refugee. And I was hanging around there, and I had nothing else to do. So we started writing up these regulations with the help of a friend of mine in Sinhala, English and Tamil, handwritten, and then got typewritten and got it published eventually. That was the first proper standards regulation that came under the Food Act. There are currently 32 regulations and a few more under deliberations. The Food Act, so to speak, has been amended on 2 occasions. Unfortunately, the amendments did not address the issue of increase in the fines in keeping with the time, whereas most other laws, including Consumer Affairs Authority Act, came out in 2003, bearing heavy fines and followed up with heavier fines over time. The last time I checked, in 2003, Act prescribed fines amounting to 100,000 rupees, and it has gone manifold since then. We are still with the maximum of 10,000 rupee fine. I'm not saying that people should be punished severely, but if the punishment is not appropriate and discouraging the violators, it serves no purpose. For example, when a case is filed, the penalty imposed on the violator amounts only to 10,000 rupees if the violator is charged for his product being injurious to health, which is altogether a different interpretation considering whatever happening in the field now. But that's the maximum. What happens if the man pleads not guilty? If the person who committed the offense has pled not guilty, and he defends the case, he has to hire a lawyer, he has to go for several, on several occasions, he has to attend the courts and all hassles. So they usually plead guilty and get away from that. So the fine itself is not sufficient to discourage violations. So we have agitated for a while, requiring the Food Control Administration to amend this act to increase the fine. So far, no results. Drafting food regulations is a bit of a process, and it involves referring to text of Codex Alimentarius Commission, Sanitary and Phytosanitary Agreement, WTO Agreement, SLS standards, ISO standards. We have to get inputs and compare all these inputs into one and then make drafting food regulation if you are referring to standards or hygienic practices, especially the SPS agreement, Codex Alimentarius Commission advisory texts are very helpful in drafting regulations. Food standards are published by various bodies like ISO, SLS standards Sri Lanka, SLSI Sri Lanka, Codex Alimentarius Commission providing advisory texts. They become mandatory only mandatory in Sri Lanka only when they are published as regulations under the Food Act. So you cannot mandate it on people unless they are published under the Food Act. That is one area. Now, SLS has voluntary standards, and we adopt them for various reasons because they are readily made available, and we are interacting. We have been interacting with the SLSI and consulting each other in the meetings as well as in the committees, and finalize these regulations. We are talking about food hygiene regulation, one of the important regulations we have published. Food hygiene regulation forms a basic of for certification level of some certifications are given, HACCP, the other published certification system, and the food registration of premises regulation. The registration of premises regulations are elaboration actually of the hygiene regulations. The Food Act requires that the food premises must be registered, and it's a mandatory registration process. It replaced the licensing system of the local authority. Earlier, it used to be the licensing, because the local authorities have started ignoring health aspects and food safety aspects of consumers. We had to resort to this registration of premises regulation by amending the Food Act. The food hygiene regulations provided almost all the hygiene standards that need to be followed by food handling establishments to ensure food safety. Talking of food safety, there are a lot of people confusing it with the food security or food safety. They're interchanging and overlapping issues. And this has been explained several times to even professionals. They do not seem to understand. Food safety and food security are quite different, although they are interconnected. And Professor Samarji was very insistent on this, and it still remains to be the same. So food hygiene regulations ensures the food safety, yet we have to no reliable quantitative assessment or application of the provisions of these regulations. This is what my concern is, because we make regulations and standards, adopt standards, and we do not know what is actually happening in the ground zero, the field level. As a member of the training team, I have gone around the country training regulatory officials, including MOHs and PHIs, authorized officers, and we have several times we have gone on, but it has not gone deep enough in their minds and actions. For reasons, there are reasons for this, because the authorized officers are increasingly burdened with a lot of duties. When there is an outbreak of something else, dengue, corona, etc., and their burden is coming too much, and therefore they cannot devote enough time, and there has to be some way to be devised that sufficient time is allocated in the list of duties of the authorized officers, and also, if possible, to appoint food inspectors for every MOH area, which was one of the recommendations we jointly made. And there's some opposition among the health inspectors for this, because they feel it as if their own responsibilities of authorities taken away, which should not be the case if you are really concerned about the health of the people. The food registration of premises regulations, as I said earlier, is almost a checklist of food hygiene regulation. This is where you look at issues from environment to the kitchen and the serving area, everything, all inclusive package of registration. But these parameters prescribed in these regulations are very difficult to exercise because these premises are, or the owners are not only evasive, but they have no resources to comply with these regulations. But the idea is, if they cannot do it under the food registration of premises regulation, they have to close shop and look for some other business rather than compromising the health of the public. That is the idea, because there are so many food handling establishments in the country which is erupting overnight, and then they say they have no other way of livelihood. But that is no reason why they should be compromising the people's health. So they have to be, we have to be very strict on this area and cut down on this number of unhealthy establishments which cannot be brought up to par. The risk-related monitoring and surveillance is very important, because a lot of people just go through the motions, and for example, the grading of establishments, A, B, C, or D, and then issuing a certificate, it doesn't work. So the risk-related monitoring, what are the risks involved? Risks are different from area to area. The fishing area has one risk, the meat slaughtering area has one risk, and general food area has one risk, and these risks must be assessed on the basis of their risk involved. Due to the prevailing economic situation, it must be recognized that there are greater chances of food handling establishment cutting corners by way of reusing leftovers several days, using inferior ingredients in food preparations, shortfalls in cleaning and disinfection, adulteration of food, etc. They cut down on the number of workers, and they do not do any cleaning. And there are some good establishments that are deteriorated because of the economic downturn we have encountered, and they have got rid of a number of employees and trying to save money on that. For example, they do not use their freezers and refrigerators in a manner that will we safeguard the integrity of the food, and heating facilities and all that are compromised. So these recently, even I fell victim for one of these places, which one place where I recognize as a reasonably good place, where I bought a packet of meal on returning from a journey, and I found that the leftover meat for several days have been included in the parcel, and I had discarded that. And I had the urge to make a complaint to the authorities. Unfortunately, that is not so practicable in this area. So I had to just blame my fate for it and give it up. One of the other areas of concern is notification of investigation of food poisoning. In terms of Section 30 of the Food Act, every medical practitioner shall report all cases of food poisoning to REHS or MOH, the area. This is not really happening. Now, if for example, even in the government medical institution, there used to be a system of notification of infectious diseases along with food poisoning also there. But nobody takes food poisoning for what it is. They don't just recognize food poisoning as food poisoning, and they treat them for the symptoms and get rid of them. And investigations never done or rarely done, preventive measures never taken. Only where there are large outbreaks, for example, in the garment factories and hotels where large gatherings take place, then it becomes a food poisoning episode. So this is actually, when it becomes food poisoning, it says police is investigating. Police officers are investigating this food poisoning, where few or any subsequent involvement of the health officials, regulatory officials are rarely involved. So that is a sad situation, because we cannot have the sufficient number of, accounting. We do not know really what is happening in terms of food poisoning and what are the after effects of food poisoning and so on. This is a very sad situation and it has to be corrected. I have seen some of these unsightly scenes. Fried chicken, chunks of chicken fried and displayed in glass displays for several days. It's sitting there in the showcases for several days. Nobody cares. When they become stale or they cannot display it anymore, they make them into pieces and often add them to foods like fried rice, kottu, etc. So they are definitely containing toxins or food poison causing bacteria. But it is not verifiable that animals slaughtered, it's about slaughterhouses and animals. They do not seem to have undergone antemortem, post-mortem examination, in the absence of any seal or on the meat displayed in the stalls. In terms of butcher's ordinance, it must be displayed with the seal approval by the meat inspector. It could be a veterinary surgeon or the authorized officer or a public health inspector who is in charge of the slaughterhouses and meat stalls. What we hear is that these in the Colombo and suburbs, the animals go direct to the Demeter slaughterhouse, and there it is slaughtered and inspected and passed by a veterinary surgeon and distributed to all the meat stalls in the suburbs also. So this is very unsatisfactory situation, because we do not know what animals have been slaughtered and what animals are carcasses are brought into the meat stalls. So this is very unsatisfactory. So this has to be rectified. Fish stall is very, very, like Professor Samarajiva said, fish sale. Now we are surrounded by sea, and we don't eat fresh and wholesome fish. Fish sold in several outlets are stale, and they have, some of them are reached the state where it has to be thrown out or disposed of, and not fit for human consumption. The stores themselves are not properly constructed. The knives used are rarely, if ever, washed. Running water is never used for cleaning purpose. Water collected from stagnant sources or from heavily polluted canal. Now in this area, we have a whole street full of fish stalls at Handala Elakanda, which are just spread out on the side of the road without any protection. And water is taken from the highly polluted, dense water from the canal. And that too is kept in a bucket, and the buildup is over time till evening. The same water is used, it never changed, and the contamination of fish keeps on increasing. Therefore, if somebody is buying a cut fish, or they buy the fish and cut, even if they are fresh fish, it just become contaminated. So there must be some regulations for these things. And of course, they must be imposed. There are other things like frying oils. There are some outlets where they make vade, kadale and all that. And similar foods are prepared, used frying oil repeatedly. They fry these snacks for days on end. And when it becomes so dark, they cannot do it anymore, ultimately not fit for the purpose they are collected by some people and allegedly used in the preparation of chili paste. It doesn't get thrown off even at that stage. It is used in the preparation of chili paste in some other areas. So we are eating poisons over poisons. So ice cream. Ice cream is another, as we know, since it contains milk, it's a very vulnerable food where food poisoning bacteria can grow very fast and all that. And we, in 1952, had some specific regulation relating to dairies. Milk and milk products, including ice cream manufacturing. Under the local authority standard regulation, there was a system issuing vendor's license in respect of ice cream. This is not there anymore. Although there are comprehensive procedures of ice cream manufacturing under the certification system, they are not applicable to most of the ice cream manufacturers at the cottage level or village level. Overnight, there are people manufacturing ice cream and selling it on their doorsteps. People are consuming, and we don't know what kind of milk you use, what kind of other ingredients are milk. Nobody monitors it. I'm very sad to say it is very unsatisfactory situation. So this, I thought I would share some of my experience, and in a short period of time where I had time. And I'm really thankful to everyone who partook in this discussion, and thankful to Professor Niranjali for inviting me to take part in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And I think those ground zero situations that you and Professor Samarajeva mentioned are quite an eye-opener for almost everyone here in the audience. So thank you very much, sir, for your presentation. And now we're coming towards the end of our session. So now the forum is open for discussion. So you may either unmute yourself and answer any questions that you have, or you can type them out in the chat box.
May I ask whether this organization have any future program of educating the public on these issues and sort of increasing their awareness?
Can I respond to that?
Yes, sir. Go ahead. I invite you to respond on behalf of IFSTSL.
Yeah, we are in a continuous process of doing it. But unfortunately, we have to do it single-handed. For example, in our newsletter, we continuously write articles on this, which is circulated to members and which is available free of charge in the web. Also, we have taken the trouble to print books. We can't sell them. I sent 50 copies of these books to 50 schools. Each letter was addressed individually to the principal requesting, please acknowledge the receipt of this. And this is free. And the cost of this book is this much. So you can account its costing in your ledgers. I got replies from only 5 schools. So the problem is people in Sri Lanka doesn't seem to understand that they're having all these problems and they have to come out of it. So we are continuously doing it by the Institute of Food Science and Technology. We are regularly having seminars. Anybody who goes to the web will see. If you go through the newsletter, each newsletter will tell you how many programs we had and what we were doing and what is the audience we had, but very difficult to push the things. On the other hand, the authorities are not at all interested in anything because they have their own way. You may be aware that I gave free of charge the copyright of my book to the Health Ministry, and they printed it. And when they were printing it, I said, please print a lot of copies so that we can give it to schools and so on. But the authority said, no, for the first round, we will give it to the public health inspectors and food inspectors. Okay, good enough. I hope it has gone there. And I also hope that those gentlemen are using it. So we are trying our best to give this education at all levels. But how much it works, I don't know. Thank you for your nice question.
Yes, I totally agree with you. But unfortunately, the reading habit of people has drastically gone down. They do not read anything. They just depend on somebody to come and tell something, or they go to the internet or something and do it. And so personally going to train these people, we have encountered problems of understanding.
Also.
The reading habits have gone down. Okay. That is one of the reasons. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions?
Even for today, I wrote some articles to the press. I don't know whether they have come out in the press or not. Because when I go through the press, I think what I see in the e-version which I get here, I can read all the rape cases, all the killings, all the motor car accidents, the number of people dying, and so on. So everybody seems to love to read that kind of material rather than something which is going to help themselves in their own health. Thank you.
Yes, sir, I think that's a very sad situation where how the media tries to direct the attention on all these different crime-related things, but here we have real issues related to food safety and where we need to raise awareness. So I think that's a very valid point that you're trying to make. Dear participants, I will give a few more minutes for you to type in your questions in the chat box, or you can unmute yourselves and ask any questions that you have.
This is Dhammika Gunasekara. Can I actually not make a question, but a comment about some of the things that are presented by Professor Samarajiva and Mr. Nagaya and so on, Professor Conrad as well. Basically, I believe it's not really a case of ignorance. I suppose it's a case of not caring. Maybe because if it is ignorance, we understand that there are certain people or farmers who produce a different plot for their own consumption and another plot for marketing and so forth. So, I mean, if it is ignorance, then they wouldn't do it that way. So, I believe, this is a question of how the perception or how they feel about, getting into the market or doing something that is not, it may be not illegal, but whatever they are doing is they're not conscious about the repercussions of that. So I believe it's a change of mindset that is required from farming to consumption to processing, everybody, including the consumer. So I believe the points that were raised by the speakers were very, very valid. And I believe this has to be taken into context in our future sessions as well. Thank you very much for the enlightening speeches.
Thank you, Mr. Dhammika, for that comment. And I have a question of my own. Perhaps Mr. Nagaya can comment on this. People have asked me now when they design a label, now this is related to labeling regulations. So when they design a label for their food product, something that is not fortified, it's any sort of regular food product. So when they design their label, do they need to get the Food Control Administration unit's approval in some sort of way, or to say that they are adhering by the labeling regulations, or whether can they directly put their labels into print?
If I may, there are parameters under which can be followed by the label designers specified in the labeling and advertising regulations that can be done. There may be issues like making a claim, health claim or nutrition claim. You have to get approval from the Food Control Administration. Other than that, you can follow the parameters provided in the food labeling and advertising regulations. There are no hard and fast rules. You have to consult anybody, unless, of course, you have some doubt. You can always ask someone. And because designing a label is very expensive, and you have to go back on the drawing board. that will be more expensive. And therefore, you can consult somebody who is familiar with it and do it. I hope that answers your concern.
Yes, sir. So is there a contact point at the Food Control Administration's unit for such consultations?
It's not actually a consultation, but if someone is willing in that setup, they can give you some advice, but they are not, I don't know.
Well, what I saw a couple of days back, or maybe even today, is that there's a new regulation coming up in 1st of next year, where there will be very strict conditions given by the health authorities regarding labelings, especially in relation to misguided labeling that is being used at the moment. So that's a good sign.
Yes, misleading label is always has been always a problem, and of course these the lines between misleading and statement of facts are very thin, and it can be argued one way or the other. So, but there are clear cases of misleading that they can be taken to task, and that should be done so. But I didn't see that news. Even at the moment, there is a technical advisory committee meeting is going on. I couldn't go. I usually don't. And yeah, I could ask some of them. What is that all about?
Thank you very much, sir. So seems that there are no more questions. Thank you, everyone. We have been here for almost 3 hours now, and I feel like there's a lot of valuable information regarding food standards, regulations, and the general practice of those, and what we should be doing, and things that we can basically include into our lives. So I would now like to invite Ms. Chamudika Senrath, the Joint Secretary of IFSTSL, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Umesh. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we gather here to celebrate the World Food Safety Day 2023, Food Standard Saves Life, a remarkable event aimed at raising awareness about the importance of food safety in our lives. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to express our deepest gratitude to all the speakers who shared their valuable insights and knowledge with us. Your thought-provoking presentations have not only educated us, but also have inspired us to make positive changes in our approach towards food safety. We are honored to have had the opportunity to learn from your expertise and experience. I would like to extend our sincere appreciations to our moderator, Mr. Umesh Rajapaksa. You have done a good job. And I would also like to express our gratitudes to the Board of Governors and EXCO members of IFSTSL. Our special thanks goes to the President-elect, our first Professor Sam, for his participations in this event. Further, I would like to express our gratitude to Judith Meach, the Secretary General of IFST, and Professor Anne Pereira, who supported this event. We are grateful for your commitment to promoting food safety and for partnering with us in our mission to create a safer and a healthier food environment. Last, but certainly not least, I want to express my heartfelt appreciation to all the participants who attend this event. Your enthusiasm, active participation, and insightful questions have made this event engaging and meaningful. Your commitment to learning and sharing knowledge about food safety will undoubtedly contribute to a safer and a healthier society. In conclusion, Food Safety Day 2023 has been a remarkable event filled with enlightening discussions, valuable insights, and a collective commitment towards ensuring safe and nutritious food for all. Once again, I extend my deepest gratitude to everyone involved in making this event a grand success. Let us carry forward the spirit of this event and continue to promote food safety in our homes, communities, and workplaces. Together, we can make difference and build future where safe, healthy food is accessible to all. Thank you and have a great day.
With that, we can conclude today's session. So thanks again for everyone who joined. Have a nice day.